Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Greg, the single guy, and Matt, the family guy. We're recording episodes from around the globe to tell you about the best kept secret in education. That's right, it's teaching overseas. We're glad to have you.
Hey, boys and girls, fellow listeners, family, friends, international teachers, and whoever else might be just catching our podcast. Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast. I am your host, the family guy, Matt, and with me is
Greg, the single guy, and then we've got a special guest, Matt.
We do, Greg. You want to tell them about our special guest for the day?
Well, our special guest is originally Canadian, so we'll forgive him for that. But he is I don't really need to even introduce him. Andrew Hallam is on our show today, and most people know him from his earlier book, The Millionaire Teacher, that came out, I think, 2014. But right now, recently, he has republished a third edition of that called The Millionaire Expat. And his brand new book is called Balance. Also, he's been busy these days. So welcome to our show, Andrew.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, with Millionaire Teacher, actually, I've done two editions of that book. So the first one was 2011, and the second was 2017. And then the publisher really wanted, after I wrote Millionaire Teacher, they wanted to brand that whole thing because it became a really successful book in the United States. So it hit number one for every business and finance related investment category. Got as high as 12 overall for Amazon. So they were pumping it. Like they were, let's write Millionaire Teacher for dogs and cats and Millionaire Teacher for, anyone and everyone, and sort of serialize that concept. And I never wanted to. I said, I've got a day job. I like what I'm doing. There are a lot of good books that are written about investing. I don't need to write, Millionaire Teacher for women, Millionaire Teacher for kids, Millionaire Teacher for retirees. But I got the idea to write a book for expats, just because so many people have been asking me, like, hey, I'm British, I live in Cairo, how do I build a portfolio of index funds? And so I did a lot of research, and then I ended up writing a book called The Global Expatriate's Guide to Investing, which sounded like a textbook. And the second edition of that was actually Millionaire Expat. So the publisher's like, that's such a lame title, Andrew. We got to go with something a little catchy. So I published the second edition of Millionaire Expat, which was essentially the second edition of that expat book. And then just this month released the third edition of that book. And at the same time released a brand new book called Balance.
I really enjoyed Millionaire Expat, and it really hits our audience because when you talk about as far as Canadian, US dollar, you talk about the Australians, you have different sections that really speak out to the people that we teach with. And it's not just a US, it's not just a Canadian thing. And I really enjoyed reading that. I didn't read every one of those because I don't have Canadian dollars or Australian dollars, right? I didn't read all those sections, but I really enjoyed the overall book, and it spoke to me. And I'll tell you, I'll talk later maybe about Generali. I didn't tell you that I actually dodged a bullet with them, and I just stopped paying them. But I didn't know anything about it, but it spoke. So maybe I'm getting your two books mixed up too. But let's do that.
You're not. You're bang on. You're bang on.
Matt's
Greg,
like, oh my God, Greg's talking.
Greg, you sound like you need a life ring thrown your way, buddy.
Well, Matt, what do I not like to talk about in life usually?
That would definitely be money. That's a topic Greg would tend to avoid if he just could altogether.
My mom would agree, as so my dad. So, Andrew, I'm going to turn it over to Matt. He's got some more pointed questions for you.
I was just going to say, Greg, some of the things you did leave off was, did you know that Andrew's book was the number one finance book, not only on Amazon USA, but Amazon Canada and Amazon UAE as well. And as far as we know, that's the only finance book to be able to do that, or books to be able to do that. So congrats on that. That's a huge step for maybe somebody not initially starting off with those sorts of goals, which is incredibly impressive if you ask me. So I thought that was a really cool fact.
Thanks, Matt.
So Andrew, to start off with, I know that there always tends to be, there's an evolution. I don't know your whole background, but is there some sort of evolution of where all this sort of began, kind of the quest with money? Like, we were just talking before that you had kind of gone overseas and it appeared to be something you liked, but was there a certain catalyst in your life, in your career that got you focused on the idea of going overseas to begin with?
Yeah, like for me, the whole concept of money is just a tool for me. Like I don't love money. I don't love investing. And I think it's wrong to love and money and investing, ironically. But I love life. So, it's just that recognition, that the realization of knowing that one day I'm going to be dead. We're all going to be dead. We've all got this terminal illness, and none of us know when that's, when the clock is going to strike midnight for any of us. So for me, the prime motivation for building wealth or building financial independence really was related to lifestyle. So being able to take time off work if I wanted to, even if I wasn't fully financially independent early on,
Sure.
to be able to take these sabbaticals. So I was teaching in a public school in British Columbia, and I took a deferred salary leave, which was an awesome deal. It was the school district would take a portion of your salary. They would keep it. For me, I did what was called a 3-in-1. So they took 33% of my gross income, and then for 3 years. And then in the 4th year, they give it back to you on a monthly basis plus interest, and you have a full year off. So you could do whatever you want, and they would guarantee you your job back at the end of the year. So I chose to travel. And so I thought in 1 year I could see the world. I was very naive, but I was able to see some interesting places. And then while I was in Morocco, I got an email from the principal of the school that I was teaching at, the high school I was teaching at on Vancouver Island. And he said, I've just taken this job at Singapore American School. And I knew he had done that the previous year. So he had left. And he sent this email and asked, are you interested? I know you like to travel, you like new places. Would you be interested in meeting the superintendent at a job fair? So I was really lucky. I ended up
you were lucky
meeting him outside the job fair. And, we had lunch, and then I ended up getting that job and teaching at Singapore American School. So I taught there for 12 years.
Excellent. For the people that haven't read your book, one of the things that you've done, and this goes not just necessarily for teachers, but it's for people who have any sort of background, is you took such a complex topic that money could be, and you really boiled it down to kind of the bare bones. Here's what you really need to know. And you really made the idea and the concept of money management on a personal level really seem relatable and easy to do. What was kind of your first big lesson with money that really got this going? And you were like, oh yeah, I think I might be onto something here.
Like in terms of personally, like actually personally deciding I was going to save?
Yeah, maybe just like a personal lesson along the way that you realized with money, like, wow, I think I'm going to be able to do this.
Yeah. I met a guy when I was in university, and I was working at a bus depot. So I was paying for my own college fees, and I was 19, and rumor had it that it was a garage. So at this bus depot, I was a guy who would drive the buses through an automated bus washer at the end of the night, fuel them, and then park them. And there were mechanics there. And the other guys all said that there was a particular mechanic who was a millionaire. And I didn't really believe that. I thought, like, why would he, how is that possible? Someone could become a millionaire on a mechanic's salary. And they said, no, like, if he ever speaks to you about money, like, make sure you listen to him. And then one day this guy started talking to me. Actually kind of took me into this office. We had a night shift, and he sat me down and he asked me what I would do he says, what would you do if I gave you $10,000 right now? And I thought, wow, it was so Godfather-like, I thought, this guy's actually going to give me some money. But he wasn't. He was just wanting to see, like, what I would say. And so I said I'd put it towards my student loan. And he said, that's an acceptable answer. And years later, he said to me, maybe about a year later, he said, if I had told him that I'd buy a new car or get a stereo for my car or whatever, he probably wouldn't talk to me again unless he had to. He was a bit of a strange duck in that respect, a bit of a snob, but he taught me how compound interest worked. He said to me, if you do nothing else, by the end of the summer, you make sure that you start investing at least $100 a month. So I was 19, and I said to him, like, I don't know if I can afford that, because I've got to pay for college. And He said, I've watched you go to that vending machine, and buy stuff out of that thing. And so if you add up what you're buying out of that vending machine, you're probably close to $100 a month already just on the crap that you're buying out of the machine. He says, if you invest just that money alone, by the time you're 65, you'd have $1 million. They showed me how compound interest worked, and I went, wow, so I can work less or less hard and have money work for me. And then I can do so many of the cool things that I might want to do, like take sabbaticals, have mini retirements along the way, or at that point, retire early. So that really caught my attention. And that was the start for me.
Sure. Excellent. So if I got this right, would it be, let's say somebody's listening to this and they go to check out your book and they're wondering, gosh, what should my very first step be? Could it really be just as simple as that, of setting some sort of a goal of a month of money they want to set aside and making sure that they hit that goal?
Yeah, just setting that small amount aside every single month. And, also, I think that if somebody has debts that are charging them, say, 5.5% or 5% interest or more, I think they should pay off those debts first. So I guess there's two ways. This is quite nuanced, because if you look at like a credit card debt, for example, somebody has a credit card debt, pay that down, like hammer that, because you're going to be charged, up to 18 to 20% on that loan. And you're not going to make that long-term in the stock market. So paying off a debt is equivalent to an after-tax guaranteed return. So if you have like a student loan that's charging you 6%, and yeah, they're up there. They're usually around that. And you pay that down, that's equivalent to an after-tax guaranteed return of 6%. No one can guarantee you that on anything, a bond or a savings account or even the stock market, because of course, it fluctuates. But the idea, when I say it's nuanced, I think just the idea, Matt, of taking a small amount and investing a small amount, if you have large debts, just to make it a habit, just to actually get that on the go. So it could just be literally, like in my case, it was $100 a month. It could just be that small amount. And then take your other resources and hammer down any high interest debt. And then once you've crushed the debt, then you can start taking your resources and pushing it more into the investment products.
Absolutely.
Can I follow up with a question?
Go ahead, Greg.
Okay. So, Andrew, I have a scenario here, and it might hit some of the people that that have been teaching in Central America and some of the lower paying areas. They can have a great lifestyle. And let's say, I'll use myself as an example. I only made like $12,000 my first year. I was not lucky enough to fall into something like you did with SAS. I mean, that's a top tier school. I was working at a good school, but I was making $12,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And that was like, you get a $500 US check at the end of the month of each month, but you'd only have like the local currency to live off of. And my question is, and I understand that it's compounding your money. So it's starting off even small, putting it away. Here's my specific question. For a teacher like that, or a teaching couple, or anybody that's in that situation that they're making very little, where would they put it? Like, where do they wait until they have a certain amount that they keep putting that $100 away, and then try to get into one of those funds that you talk about through a special financial guy, or how do they do that?
So it depends on what your nationality is. And so in terms of what's actually available for you. So if you are American, you can open an account with Interactive Brokers. You might already have an account from Vanguard that you'd opened up before you moved abroad. If not, you can open an account with Interactive Brokers. And there's a guy named Mark Zorel who works for a firm called Plan Vision. And he actually helps people do this for like $189 for a year. And it's just magic. He's probably one of the most loved people in the expatriate circuit, because what he does is he's US based, but chatting with him last time I was chatting with him, I think he had told me that he had worked with people of 80 different nationalities. And so he helps them set up an account using a screen share process. And so helps them open an account with, say, Interactive Brokers, and then shows them what to buy and how to actually purchase it online. So this is the most efficient way to do this. Instead of hiring a financial advisor. And there are plenty of those who are traveling around. Many of them are basically con artists in suits. Some of them are okay, but it's far more efficient to, if you can, do this on your own with a coach. And so a guy like Mark Zorel works as a coach. So for $189 a year, shows you how to do this. And then you can ask him questions as many times as you want throughout the year. And I think after the first year, it's sort of renewable on like $8 a month, but it's brilliant. What he does is he follows the premise that I've laid out in both Millionaire Teacher and Millionaire Expat. And regardless of where you are from, for example, if you're British, you may not want to use Interactive Brokers for several reasons. One is it's a U.S. brokerage. And so there is a possibility, even if you buy off the U.S., if you buy off a non-U.S. stock exchange, there's a possibility that U.S. estate taxes could end up hitting your heirs. And so somebody like that might open an account with Swiss Quote Bank Europe or Saxo Capital Markets. So yeah, to your point, and initially, Greg, when I wrote Millionaire Expat, it really was me trying to figure out in the beginning what will work for people of different nationalities, because we don't all have access to the same types of funds. We don't have all have access to the same types of brokerages. And so the premise, though, is exactly the same. Like the premise is basically own the world stock markets at the lowest possible cost, building a portfolio of low-cost ETFs or index funds. And then with Millionaire Expat, I just showed people of different nationalities how to do it. The beautiful thing is we've got this guy at Plan Vision who can show people how to do it.
Well, I love that, because the idea is it's very little money that they don't think they can really deal. Like can't invest stuff, but if it's just a little bit of money and they work with him, they can get started at an early age. If I had done that 20 years ago when I was in Honduras and I had known about this and you had already written your book and all that kind of good stuff, right, that I had known about, I'd be sitting on a nice nest egg because of just starting out in $100 a month, I think. And that's great advice. And I love the way that your book does spell that out. And it's just good to hear you say it on our show, just to hear how you explain it in person too. It's very well laid out in your book. And I love that. And even talking about those con artists that you talked about, I had an experience with that in Egypt, and I dodged a bullet. I just ended up not paying him after a while. And I saved a lot of money. And I was reading your book. I was going, oh my God, that was me. That was the guy.
Yeah.
Right.
That was a major incentive for me to write that book. It was just that there were so many unscrupulous financial salespeople that lurk through the international teaching community, and they'll gain access to schools, and they'll be invited to come into schools to sell their garbage. And it literally is garbage. I explain this in Millionaire Expat, it pays these people massive commissions, like crazy commissions. And then when you actually do invest in one of these products, you're sealed in for 25, sometimes even 30 years. And you can't get your money out without paying a massive penalty. And when I talk about a penalty, like it's serious. Like if you try and get it out after the first 18 months, your penalty is everything. Like you lose.
Right.
Everything.
And you said that you lose a lot of it. And in fact, now I understand why the guy was a great guy. I mean, he could sell anything. But the reason he is worried more about his investment, he's not worried about the investors. He's worried about making the sale. And now I understand why Generali was sponsoring our golf outings for the whole school.
Yes.
Because Dave set it up, and I love the guy to death. I mean, I just love that guy. I hope he's still with us. I don't know if he's still with us anymore. God rest his soul. But he was pretty sick. But anyway, now I understand it. And reading that, I felt like I dodged a bullet. But I think you're going to rescue a lot of international teachers by speaking out in your book like that. And I really appreciated that. I'm glad we talked about it on here too. So.
I think administrators too have to be so aware of this, because you'll get this firm that'll come in and will offer to sponsor the drama program or the school soccer team, and they do this. And what that does, all they are really doing is, this is a small amount of money that they're putting in, for an opportunity to make massive commissions off the teachers. And the teachers can't make money with these schemes. I mean, their fees are so crazy high that after all of the fees, especially if you are counting inflation, the after inflation returns on these things are next to nothing. So the only person that really makes out is the person who sells it to you, and they make out like a bandit. So yeah, the whole idea, like it was really one of the reasons I wanted to do such a big tour in 2017. I ended up speaking in 13 different countries at 90 different international schools. And it was people were inviting me, and I just decided I'm going to say yes to everybody who asks me to come and speak. And I was hardcore. I would go in and I would explain these products. I would put them up on the screen. I would say, look, I know that a lot of you guys are investing in these things, especially the British, because often they're British people who are targeting. It's easy for a Brit to sell to a Brit. And of course, there are a lot of British people overseas. So even Americans, they would sell these things to Americans, which is just catastrophic when it comes down to how the IRS can actually penalize you. Not only will you not make money on these things, but the IRS can come down on you so heavily because these things are domiciled in places like the Isle of Man, tax-free jurisdictions. So it's kind of like, unless you are filing your taxes properly. And in most cases, you don't. Like, you actually file it as an offshore investment. Most people won't even think about doing that the right way. The IRS can come down and hit them really, really hard for tax evasion. So, yeah, that was a big mission of mine, was to get out to give these talks. And I was so driven to do it. When people offered me money, I would say no. Like, it was just one of those things. Like, a school would say, "Okay, let us give you," and I'd say, "Look, just get me there. Just get me to the school." And so, yeah, it was one of those things that after a while, my wife was like, "Andrew, this is getting a little crazy. I mean, you've given 90 talks for free. You're insisting on not taking any money." I really wanted to get the message out. I didn't bring books. A guy who lives out of a backpack cannot bring books with him. And so I just wanted to be that person. I didn't even mention the books often or mention that I'd written anything. I just wanted to be able to share this information. So since then, my wife has made me alter the business model. So she says, "Look, you can't do these things for free anymore. This is getting ridiculous." So, yeah, I guess now I'm just like any ordinary speaker.
Matt, did you hear that? He lives when he was traveling, he was living out of a backpack. He's a kindred spirit to me, Matt. That's what he is. He wasn't carrying 4 kids around with him at the time, though.
That's all right. There's nothing wrong with that. Andrew, in fact, you've gone. It was 30 plus countries that you've talked and presented on all this, haven't you?
Yep, that's right.
And for those of you that are also familiar with Andrew, that you've also appeared on CNBC and the Wall Street Journal with some of these discussions as well, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And I wrote in my book Balance a fun story about how I ended up meeting Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, which is a fun story. Just throwing the ball at the hoop and seeing if these guys would say yes. And I ended up having a pretty cool opportunity to have an interesting conversation with both of those guys at one stage.
Well, let's transition over to Balance for a couple of moments, if you will. Do you want to give us a brief? I read the first chapter this morning and enjoyed it. And I wanted to ask you about one thing in there, but do you want to give the listeners just kind of a brief summary or overview of what Balance is about?
Well, I talked about money really as a tool, and I tried to redefine or create what I thought was a better, more holistic definition of success. And conventionally, we often think of success as somebody who has money and a great career, but success is life satisfaction. So as I mentioned in the book, when someone's motivated to do anything, like whether it's go to the bathroom or run a marathon or get a PhD or raise their kids a certain way or buy something, when you ask them why and you keep digging with why, eventually you'll come down to a derivative of life satisfaction. So I want to feel happy, safe, secure, give me a sense of purpose. It's all life satisfaction related. And so then the idea was, when I wrote Balance, it was identifying what are the elements that enhance our life satisfaction, and how does money relate to and not relate to these particular elements. So I broke it down to like a 4-legged table. So you have 4 legs, for success or life satisfaction. You have to have enough money, obviously, for shelter, healthcare, a little bit of money left over for experiences and to save for retirement. You need great relationships. I mean, this is so, so key. You need your health and you need some kind of purpose. So if you're just a trust fund child and people have just thrown money at you your entire lifestyle, your entire life, you often find these people lack purpose. And so we need that too, that reason to get up in the morning. So I wanted to write Balance based on essentially that, breaking down these 4 components, and to give people an idea too, that when you're saving for your future, you've often heard the idea of deferred gratification. We talk about, you have to defer gratification, but that's a pile of bunk. It's completely crazy. I've had people say to me like, oh yeah, you had to suffer so much when you were younger, saving really hard, and you deferred gratification. You didn't get a chance to live. And I realized, wow, they're so far off the mark, because what happens is when you buy a material thing, you upgrade your car, or you buy a new phone or new purse, watch, or whatever it is, something called hedonic adaptability comes into play. So hedonic adaptability is essentially that once you buy something, you get an immediate sugar rush, but then that thing just becomes, that new car, for example, just becomes another car. That phone just becomes another phone. Like, we get so used to what we own. So Daniel Kahneman talks about reflective happiness and experiential happiness. Reflective happiness is what we actually think will happen, or it's a justification for something. Yeah, I will be happy if. Experiential happiness is the true thing. Like, truly, are we happier? So in the book Balance, I really delved into a lot of research-based behavioral studies, psychological studies. And I found them fascinating in that material acquisitions don't enhance your level of life satisfaction at all. There are very rare instances, and I bring those up in the book Balance as well, but so rarely do material acquisitions actually enhance your life satisfaction. In fact, it can actually do the opposite. It can actually drag us down, because it's like a drug. We think it's going to make us feel better, so we take that drug, and it brings us to an even lower point once we come back to our baseline and we get used to it, and then we want more, so we buy something else. So the idea here is that if you're spending money, don't spend it on stuff. Spend it on experiences, spend it on people, spend it on relationships, spend it on giving, pro-social giving. If you think this way, it allows you also to save more money. You're spending less on crap. As a result of spending less on crap, you're actually helping the environment a lot. I mean, so many of us don't recognize that every single thing we buy, everything we buy has a massive environmental impact. So I bring all of this together in the book Balance.
That's a huge concept. I guess I wasn't even really thinking about until you just said that. That had kind of dawned on me. One of the things that you referred to in the first chapter about the desert island litmus test, I loved that concept, and I loved the idea, because you can play through that scenario so easily in your head. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's in a lot of cases when we buy something, we buy it at least in part so we can be seen having it. It's a status thing. And so there are people who are going to say, no, look, I bought this brand new car. I bought this, whatever it is, this fancy purse for me, not for anybody else. I bought it for me. And so you have to ask yourself that a really tough question. It's the desert island litmus test question. If you lived on it, say a desert island, and no one else could actually see this item, would you still own it? So if it's a high status car, would you still own it? Basically, if no one could see you drive it. And that's the key there. If no one could see you own this thing, would you still own it? Would you still purchase it? And if the answer to that question is yes, I would still purchase it, then awesome, go ahead. You've bought it for the right reasons. But in most cases, with most of the things we buy, that answer is no when we ask ourselves that soul-searching question.
Sure, absolutely. And you had also given, for example, was it the story about your friend with the Porsche as well?
Isn't that an interesting one? That was like a midlife crisis in reverse. My friend Rob always wanted a Porsche, and he became a lawyer and paid off his student loans and he bought a 911, and he ordered it, and the dealership called him up and said, "Hey, Rob, your car's here." And he didn't go to pick it up. And then they called him like a week later, like, well, come and get the car. And eventually his wife had to send him to the dealership. Rob, get that car. So he gets the car and he drives it just a couple of times. But in his case, he was actually embarrassed to drive it. So he recognized something interesting on a subconscious or a very conscious level once he'd acquired that vehicle. And it's that we don't love people anymore or any less based on what they drive or own. In fact, sometimes it's the opposite. Like, envy is not a good thing. Envy doesn't bring out the best in people at all. And so for him, he was kind of embarrassed to drive that car. And therein lies the irony. It really was like a midlife crisis in reverse, where eventually he drove it less and less to the point where he actually sold the car. And yet, if Rob just thought about the deserted island litmus test, and if he lived on an island and nobody else could see him drive that car, and he had these great mountain winding roads, he would have purchased and kept that car because he bought that car for the right reasons. But it was kind of interesting psychologically what he thought about it. And, in part, that's really quite true. It's when we have a lot more than other people, or we showcase we have a lot more than other people, we don't actually impress them. It's a really weird, primitive human belief that people will look at us differently or see us differently or see us successful if we have this really big, nice house on the hill that's better than everybody else's. But if nothing, it fractures communities. If you look at the story of Rosetto, and there's a place in Pennsylvania called Rosetto, and there's scientists found that it was a medical marvel because people lived just about forever. The people lived like well into their 80s and 90s, and scientists descended on this place to figure out like what was it about Rosetto that ensured that people were so happy and lived so long. They found the water was the same and the food was the same. They didn't eat any differently. They didn't eat better. Water was the same as nearby towns. But what was interesting is that they brought, when they came over from Italy, they'd maintained some pretty old Italian customs, some really old Italian customs, in that there were multiple generations in the same home. For example, people had open door policies. They were always in and out of each other's places. It was highly, highly social. But here's what was really fascinating. If you had more money than your neighbor, it was considered poor taste to own a much more expensive vehicle or to live in or buy a much more expensive house. So they recognized that was their cultural thing. But what happened with Rosetto is eventually when some of the younger people got sort of the sense of the American dream, and they started making more money and they started to buy things that were, quote, better than their neighbors. And they started to build bigger houses away from that close nucleus. It not only did it on a very small level fracture the community, but today people in Rosetto don't live any longer than they do in any typical U.S. town. So when Dan Buettner did a series of studies in his book called Blue Zones, you have these regions of the world where people live a really long time.
Sure.
They all have those relative commonalities, which I find fascinating, and I brought up in that book, Balance.
Wow, that's fascinating. Andrew, if we want to pick up a copy of the book, what's our best way, a best route to do that?
At I guess any online retailer or a brick and mortar bookstore. So if you're listening to this and you could wander into like a Barnes and Nobles, or on my website at andrewhallam.com, I have a series of links to different online retailers that you could purchase the book Balance from.
And perfect. I'll be picking the rest of that up because I need to finish it. I really got into the chapter.
I'm keeping my scooter, you guys. I'm keeping my scooter. I have to use, other people have like big Jeeps and stuff and really nice vehicles on camp here where I live. I have a motor scooter. It goes from like 0 to 65 in 5 minutes. And it cost me like $1,000 5 years ago. And I'm telling you, Andrew, it's the best thing ever. I have minimalized everything. I only own one thing right now, and Matt knows this. It's the glass door that's on my staff housing. I have like an outer door. It's like a screen door, but it's glass, and that's the only retail thing I own.
So I might have to call you back someday and say, what do I do with some of this money, nest egg? Because I'm not like Matt Judd. I don't have like this financial sense, and I'm at the bottom of the whole financial deal. That's why I started reading your books, because I needed to learn, but Matt Judd's got it dialed in. I know he does.
And Greg, one of the things you need to keep in mind, though, too, Andrew, your book was kind of the catalyst for me starting myself personally on that journey. I have some friends that are in the financial business, so it always comes up in our discussions. But a few years ago, one of my New Year's resolutions was to read a certain number of books during the year and just begin teaching myself about money. And your book was where I actually started and made a lot of sweeping changes to my portfolio just based solely upon that. So when people listen to this, these aren't giant steps. This isn't, you didn't figure out the recipe for rocket fuel, and I didn't decipher this message. I mean, this is something, it's tangible. People can do this. And as educators, I wonder how much of this starts with our financial literacy with kids and students at younger ages.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, there's certain courses that aren't mandatory in schools. And I really wonder why. Courses on relationships, for example.
Sure.
Massive, right? I mean, just interpersonal relationships, conflict resolution. And these are things that we need to deal with on a daily basis throughout our entire lives, not algebra, right? for most of us. It's so
come to my third grade class, Andrew. We talk about conflict resolution all the time. And at Matt's house with 4 boys, he's got conflict resolution classes every day.
School's in session 24/7.
There's always someone crying.
If I could, I'd love to move past the books and things like that and talk just a little bit about your lifestyle that you've been able to lead because of some of these choices you've made. And I've never heard the phrase before where you said globally nomadic. Mm-hmm. And you kind of just made me stop dead in my tracks. Tell us about being globally nomadic. I find it fascinating, and I want to hear more about that.
Well, we really fell into the lifestyle, Matt. It wasn't really by design. It was just that we were working at Singapore American School. My wife wanted to take a year off. And so we thought we'd take a year off to travel. 1 year led to 2, which led to 6, which has led to 8. And we just decided we would do just a variety of different things and just pack some different experiences into our lives. One of those things was we bought a Winnebago Travato camper van. It's like a Mercedes Sprinter, and Winnebago does the inside. And we thought we would drive this thing to Argentina. And we had no plan, in terms of time, where we were going to be. So we left British Columbia, we purchased it in British Columbia. It was like we flew up to BC, bought this thing, went through the Western US, went, through the national parks, which was spectacular, down the Baja Peninsula of Mexico, took a ferry across to Mazatlan, to mainland Mexico. And sure. Mexico is rich, in terms of just geographic diversity, cultural diversity. Mexico is amazing. So we spent 10 months alone in Mexico, Mexico just traveling all over the place. And then we went down into Central America. But what was kind of interesting for me, and in part, this was an impetus for writing that book, Balance, too, was that we were rubbing shoulders with people, hanging out with people who lived totally different lifestyles to us. We were used to international teachers. We were used to teachers, public school teachers. Now, we had friends, obviously, that did different things, but we didn't know anybody that raised their families in RVs as they traveled around Central America making music and playing concerts, selling their music
what was
on
that show?
Spotify and CDs. We never met
Family.
people that did that. And you'd meet these people, and some of them have really got it together. You get these bohemians that are just living for the day. Sure. And, they've got no eye on tomorrow. But I found what was super cool was meeting those that, and many of them actually had a really good perspective on things. They didn't buy things. They were minimalists. Now, obviously, if you're living in an Airstream, you're a minimalist as they travel around. Sure. They're not buying stuff. They'd saved money, talking to them. One of the first things people ask is, when you're traveling, how are you doing this? Every traveler asks that. So tell me, you've been traveling for 2 years or a year or whatever. How are you doing it? How do you do this financially? And it was really fascinating to see that a lot of these people were actually spending far less than they were making. So they were saving and investing money while they were having this really cool lifestyle. So we'd be hanging around with a family of Argentinians around a campfire, laughing, joking, talking about life. And then we would park our van the very next day. And my wife and I would get a request to speak at a big resort in Malta or a bank in Dubai. We would fly off or Facebook in Dubai, and we'd fly off. And it was such a contrast, guys. Like, here we were living in this van, and I had one nice set of clothes, right? And I would pack that nice set of clothes into a small backpack. We would fly off to Dubai. I would speak at some bank. We'd go out with the executives of the bank in the evening. They'd take us out for dinner or whatever. But I noticed some really interesting things. These people often were conventionally successful. They were living the high life in Dubai, making gobs of money, but they didn't have the same twinkle in their eye. They didn't seem to laugh with as much freedom. And I started to wonder, who really is more successful here? Is it this person who's worked their way up to become a bank executive, or is it my friends who are raising their kids, traveling around in an RV, playing music? And I came to that conclusion that based on these 4 pillars that I thought about in terms of life satisfaction and success, it was these other people that actually were more successful in a holistic sense than a lot of these others. And I'm not saying that, the CEO of Facebook's going to be miserable. No, that's not what I'm saying, because there are people who can end up with really high paying jobs who they have a great balance. But by and large, the harder we work at something like financial acquisition or career, the more balls we drop in other areas that might be, say, relationship based. So, back to that whole point about us traveling, it's been great for us. I didn't expect to become a global speaker, but it was fun we started getting so many of these requests, and, to park our van in a spot in like Guatemala or Belize for a few weeks and travel off and hit a bunch of banks and insurance companies or international schools, give a bunch of talks, and then cross our fingers and fly back and hope that our $100,000 van is still there. Like, it was just like, every time was an adventure. Okay, what's going to be missing on the van? Is it going to be like,
it's there. Woo! It's still there.
Every time, Greg, every time it was there, nothing was ever wrong with it. And there were a variety of different storage facilities we would put this thing. Like, some of them were awesome in terms of like security, and they were fabulous. And others were super dodgy. They drive into this little parking lot area, and there's a guy half asleep, smoking a cigarette or drinking a beer. And yeah, you can keep your van here for a month or for 3 weeks. And a fun contrasting life that we've really enjoyed the last 8 years, just these contrasts we've had.
I have a question for you. On our show, we love talking about police stories. Do you have any police stories from your travels down through Central America and Mexico? And so, it could be anything. It could be harmless, but something funny, something off the wall. I'll let you think about it.
Yeah. I don't have to think too much about it. It's not that rare that you get pulled over by the police and they'll make up some kind of infraction. And that's the funny part, where they'll say, you were speeding when you went over that, you were speeding over here. Actually, I wasn't speeding. I just went over a speed bump. But when you got all your dishes in the back, you got to go over those really slowly, right? Like, I'm the turtle. So the fact that this guy said we were speeding was just completely
wanted lunch,
right? And so the guy shows us his iPhone, and on his iPhone, he had taken a photograph of his speedometer, and it said something like 70 kilometers an hour. And I'm just laughing at him, like, 70 kilometers an hour. You just take a picture of your own speed at some point when you're chasing somebody or just driving along, and you said, see that? That's what you were doing over that speed bump. It's like, dude, no. My wife is she's a fluent Spanish speaker. And generally when this happens, we're generally pretty calm, and we don't typically end up that, like, you don't pay them. You just do what you can not to pay them. Don't give them your driver's license. Give them a photocopy of your driver's license. Like, all these little things, because once they have that, they've got you. So my wife's a bit fiery. Her name's Pele, and she's named after the Hawaiian goddess of fire.
Sure.
And on one occasion, she just lit into these guys, which in Latin America and a real machismo type culture, I don't think that's particularly the best thing you should do. So that situation didn't work out as well for us. I think we did end up having to pay that fine.
Oh,
yeah, and these guys, they don't get paid a lot of money. I mean, they get paid so little, and so what they'll do is there's an expensive car. Let's make up some kind of infraction if they're not actually breaking a rule, and see if we can get a little bit of money to put some food on our table.
see, Andrew, the connection we have here, and Matt and I have talked about this in the past, is that both of he and his family and I all lived in Venezuela for several years. That's how we got to know each other, and that's how I adopted my parents, Matt and Stacy, and my brothers. So we experienced a lot of these things that you're talking about with Mexico and with the Latino world. It's fantastic, but I do want to hear more. I'm just saying, I'm sharing with you our connection, but we do want to hear some more about this lifestyle that you lead, because do you write full time right now? Because you travel down in a camper van. You were writing the whole time, if I'm not mistaken. You've mentioned that in your book a little bit. You're writing at all these weird times. That's how you're doing things now. You don't teach anymore. You're an author full time and speaker.
Yeah, it's, we did think that we would go back to teaching, and we still might, because we both love it. So it's nice having that option. We're financially independent, so we don't actually need to work. And so that's been a really nice thing about, having put money aside really early and just letting that money compound. But work is important for people. It gives people a sense of purpose. And so it's really, and I do talk about this in that book, Balance, too, where if you, on aggregate, people that fully retire earlier, on aggregate end up dying earlier, because they don't end up using their mind to the same extent. They're not interacting. They're not blowing cobwebs out of there. And so some fascinating studies on how things like dementia and Alzheimer's end up hitting people who retire earlier versus later far more prevalently. So obviously there's a genetic component to things like that, but there are things that you can do to try to help yourself in that capacity. But I was writing before, Greg, for the Globe and Mail. So I was working at SAS, Singapore American School, and I was writing a column for the Globe and Mail, Canada's national newspaper. And I was writing, every second week or so for a US-based financial services company called Asset Builder. They build portfolios of index funds for resident Americans, not for expats, but for residents. And then when I started to travel, in both cases, my quote freelance employer saw that I had a bit more time. So Asset Builder in 2014, they asked me if I would write a weekly for them. So I write a weekly column for them, and a Swiss company asked me if I could write for them as well. And I just asked them if they'd be interested in buying the Asset Builder stories. And so I write once a month an original piece for Swiss Quote, and otherwise they pay me to republish the Asset Builder stories that I write. And I have the rights to those. So I actually own the rights to those. And then of course with the books, and the speaking, it's been, obviously 2020 was a really busy year for me because I was stuck. So I couldn't be traveling around the world. And it was like, well, let's write this book, Balance. Always wanted to write that. And then while I was there, I was thinking we might as well update that book, Millionaire Expat. So it's been a really cool kind of a flurry of activity professionally, like in terms of working and writing. So I can get ahead with my writing too. So I can sometimes get 3 weeks ahead and then have nothing at all for 3 weeks. And I can just end up traveling. That's the sweetest spot of all when I can do that.
Andrew, I want to be respectful of your time here, and we're so tremendously appreciative of it. I've got one more question I wanted to ask you about, because as an expat, a North American overseas, I've got a similar background to you. I was planning to be gone 2 years, and I'm on year 14. And so I'm kind of struggling with also planning a career change and trying to figure out how am I ever going to possibly go back to the U.S., because it definitely, when you move overseas, it definitely shifts your perspective and it shifts your view on things. And so I guess I'm curious about maybe you as a person throughout all of your travels and things like that. What's some sort of something that has changed your perspective in terms of relationships with other people that has allowed you to adapt to living overseas and adapt to living in other cultures? What's kind of a personal perspective piece that's helped you grow and manage your relationships with other people?
I think I've just really, with the travel, I've just really fed a thirst that I've always had. Like the idea of meeting new people has always been a priority for me, like connecting with people. Sure. So sure. I love that. And then living overseas, and then especially the last 8 years, the traveling. I mean, I've learned more in the last 8 years than I've learned in my entire professional teaching career, just because of the sheer variety that I've been exposed to. And so like meeting all of these different people and different cultures it's just been incredible for us. And I think my parents, they recognized how important that would be really early on. Like we didn't come from a family of money. My mom worked a retail job earning minimum wage, and my dad was a mechanic, and there were 4 kids. But they scraped together some money to send me on an educational trip when I was 12 years old through the Mediterranean with a bunch of other 7th grade kids. And I was away for a month, and it just broadened my horizon in terms of like what was actually out there. And I think from that point, Matt, I was always really keen to try to satisfy that thirst for learning about new people and places.
Sure. My wife and I often talk about that with our boys too. And you had mentioned that with some of the musicians you had met. And I feel like those kids are going to learn more in their travels and their experiences. I hate to say this, than more than likely they would in a school. Mm-hmm. Because you're learning about managing relationships. You're learning about continually adapting to different cultural norms and things like that. I just think as the world kind of comes a little bit closer because of technology, that's going to be vital for them to be successful as they're older.
Yeah, I think so.
So Andrew, have you taken a glimpse of what's next? Maybe what might be around the corner for you guys?
Well, we're not very ambitious in terms of career-oriented things. We just love to often make decisions on the fly. But at this stage, we're in Panama, the country right now. We'll be here until April. We'll visit my wife's mother for a couple of weeks in mid-April. We'll visit my family in Canada. And just after that, we'll fly to Canada, do a quick visit. And then we plan to spend the summer in the south of France, but all this stuff can change on a whim. A friend can call us from Bali and say, "You gotta come. Everything's open."
No Wisconsin? Wisconsin in your
Wisconsin is after Bali. Wisconsin's after Bali. We're building up for Wisconsin. We're really building it up.
Have you guys been to Bocas yet in your time in Panama itself?
Yeah, we have. It's pretty cool. I love the islands in Bocas del Toro. It's a pretty cool area. We're right now we're in Panama City, and we're renting this place on the 35th floor, just on the Avenue de Balboa. So we have this spectacular view of the ocean and the city, and then the Panama Canal is just off to our right. Actually, I will show you guys this view because it's crazy. It's amazing. And in about 3 weeks' time, we're going to go up to the mountains of Boquete, which is really popular among a lot of expat retirees. And we've been there before. What I like about it is I love the mountains there. So it's kind of built at the base of a volcano. And so everywhere you go, it has to be up, and I'll be bringing my road bike with me. And I just love riding my bike uphill. I know it sounds sick, but I love it. I love just grinding up a hill for an hour.
That sounds pretty fantastic. Yeah, we both have that. Panama City became one of the layaway points trying to get out of Venezuela to get to the U.S. So for the last couple of years we were there, we had to route through Panama City. And so we spent time in Panama City. Greg and I spent a week in Bocas scuba diving, and I did surfing too. And Panama's a pretty sweet place. It's a really easy place to spend a lot of time.
And you can drink water out of the tap.
Matt, where was the guy from that took us through the Panama Canal? He was like Ukrainian or something. We were there. Matt and I went there, and we wanted to see the Panama Canal. So we ended up getting a tour guide, and the guy was from Ukraine or somewhere in the former Eastern Bloc, right, Matt? You have better memory than I do.
Yeah, it was Ukraine. You had it right.
Oh, good. Yeah. And, I tell you, I have to joke with you, Andrew, because we learned more about the Panama Canal than we ever thought we'd know, but we did not know that we gave it back to them in 2000. We, meaning America, gave it back to Panama in 2000 at the turn of the century. And we're like, you're welcome. Every time we were heading to somebody from Panama, we're like, you're welcome. You're welcome. We're joking around, of course. I mean, we like to be
We'd had a couple cervezas at that point.
Yeah, just a few, because I
can't
hadn't
believe you
seen
just told that story.
Oh, come on. We have to share these stories, Matt.
Sure,
and he's living right there. So I think we do it in full jest, and we also do it with the utmost respect, because we have to have fun. You say have balance and enjoy life and work hard. We have that kind of an attitude. I know Matt does, and I do. You have to work hard and play hard. And that's part of the way I find balance, right? I love my life. I love going diving. I love working hard and travel. And I love that book because of that. And I hope everybody out there is reading that book. Right, Matt?
Yeah, I think to put one final touch on it, whether you are a teacher, whether you're not, whether you live overseas or whether you don't, Andrew's concepts, and like I said earlier, how he's taken the concept of money and taken it from an area that's less complex and made it really relatable and actionable. That's kind of what started me on my journey. So thanks for that. They were tremendous reads, and I'm definitely going to be picking up Balance in the next day or so to finish that one off too.
Thank you.
Greg, you have any more questions, or should we wrap this one up?
No, I think we should wrap it up and respect his time. Andrew, I want to thank you personally for coming on to our show. It was great. I can't believe you actually had time to do that, and we totally enjoy that. We have some I'll tell Matt later about some of the relationships, some of the people that we know within our circles that have collided, at some point. But I hope to see you in an airport somewhere, or I hope to see you on a beach somewhere, in South America, in Peru or something. I'll run into you and I'll buy you dinner or something like that, right? You're hoping we can just meet sometime, right? I can't wait.
How did you know he liked Japanese peanuts and beer, Greg? Because that's probably what you're going to get if Greg's treating Andrew. Yeah, Andrew, thank you so much for your time. This has been such an awesome conversation, and I hope this book kills it. And hopefully, I would love to catch you out on tour somewhere too, and we'll come listen to you talk too as well.
Thanks so much, Matt, and thank you, Greg.
All right, so we're going to put the finishing touches on this one. This was by far one of our most fantastic episodes I think we've ever had, and hopefully everybody enjoys listening to it. So thank you for joining us, and if you have any questions or concerns or future topics you want to talk about, you can hit us up at internationalteacherpodcast@gmail.com, and you can check us out on Instagram at ITPXPats. And we are on Twitter, but we don't tweet, so that's probably not the best venue to get a hold of us either. So I'm going to sign off with Andrew and with Greg. This is Matt, the Family Guy.
And Greg, the Single Guy. And the cat guy's not here, but he's here in spirit.
And this is the International Teacher Podcast, signing off.